Okay, we're going to go over the attached lesson 3 goals and assessment, and I just want to go through how we're going to critique this stuff. We did this already, where we look at the goals themselves and we decide what level of cognition they are actually measuring. In the case of the first one, because I'm just saying I'm going to identify the figures, Cortez, Esteban, De Soto, Coronado, De la Casas, identify could be a 1 at its lowest. I'm just picking people out of a lineup, basically. Cortez, the guy who battled the Aztecs, and so on. And so it's a level 1. For goal number 2, students will be able to label the following on a map. Labeling things on a map is pretty much a level 1, unless you do something funky with it. Goal 3, students will define the following terms: plantation, missionary, mission, society, and encomienda. That's also a level 1, because defining can just be saying the definition out of the textbook. Now 4, which is identifying modern instances of the following terms: plantation, encomienda, mission, and conquistador. Those are level 2, because I am really applying my understanding of these terms and interpreting modern instances. You could also make a case that it's a level 3, but because it could be a level 2, we go with the lower of the two. And then finally, students will evaluate the fairness of Spanish society according to classroom rules for personal rights and responsibilities. That is a level 3, because the evaluate is right in there. And I actually have a handout with more verbs that are a little bit better and a little more specific that you can use in the future. Now, when I'm looking at these things, the goal critique is going to consist first of content issues. And if I'm looking at my goal or my set of goals and comparing them to the overall content of lesson 3, I look at the first one and I say, does this goal represent really what is in lesson 3? If I look at it, here I'm just going to change the color of these things. In goal 1, I see that Cortez is extra. If I'm looking at lesson 3, he's not in lesson 3, so I shouldn't really have him in my goals for teaching about lesson 3. My students should have learned about him in lesson 2. I'm also missing some key people. De Vacha and De Leon are both missing, and so I would want them included. Likewise, for goal 2, Tenochtitlan is not in the content, and I could, if I wanted to, include things like Florida, Cuba, and so on, places that the Spanish explorers went to. Again, you will be allowed to bring the lesson 3 material to class. I highly recommend, though, that you spend some time getting familiar with it so you're not paging through it wondering if a question's a level 2 rather than a level 1, or vice versa, because you don't know how it was described in the text. So spend some time getting to know that lesson 3 material. For goal 3, nothing's really wrong. Those are the terms. I may want other terms in there like peninsulare and so on, but not necessary. It's not in the bolded, but I could have them if I wanted to. Goal 4, conquistador, is not in the content, so I don't know why it's in this particular goal. And then goal 5, there's really nothing wrong. It's talking about the fairness of Spanish society. Now that's the goal critique in terms of content validity. I'm also looking at, well, do I have just an overall, mixture of cognitive goals, or are they all level 1, all level 3, and really not mixing up the different cognitive tasks that I'm giving my students. I could also talk about things that are not in there, where if I wanted to talk about the different stratified levels of Spanish society, I could say that that's not in there, but it's tough to draw a line sometimes where you're getting too particular about every last detail in the content, and I don't want you to worry about that stuff too much. If you think it covers the main ideas and the main points, then and then it should be okay. But if you want to say something, I definitely wouldn't take off any points for it, and it might be on the safe side. So that's the goal critique. Now, this is comparing the goals to the content. When we get to the assessment critique, now I'm comparing, oops, didn't want to do that, my goals to the actual assessment. And this is the assessment that comes with it. First we have some matching questions. I have some short answer questions. Or you could even call these restricted essays, but we'll call them short answer in this case. Longer essay question, what we'll call extended essays, and then simple kind of, not really a matching task, but a labeling task. So the way that I do this is I compare each question to the goals and ask myself, does each question relate to a goal? And if it does it relate to it at the right level? In the case of the first one, what was the name of the African slave who searched for gold? Well, that was Esteban, and he's in goal 1, so I would say that question 1 is okay. It's assessing, it's a level 1 goal, it's a level 1 question, so that's fine. When I look at the Who Searched for Gold in what is now called Mississippi, which Spanish explorers searched for gold in what is now in the Southwest, and so on. Again, De Soto is B, and Coronado is 3. I'm sorry. De Soto was the answer to question 2, and Coronado is the answer to question 3. And so they are assessing at the right level. The Catholic priest that defended the rights of the natives was De las Casas. That's again level 1. And a conquistador that conquered the Aztecs is Cortez. Note that it is not in lesson 3, but I don't care about that anymore. I'm just going on, if it's in my goals, is it adequately represented in my assessment, based on the assessment questions that I have. So if I'm looking at how I would write this out, I would just write a little thing for each question. And, as I did in 6 through 10, I could even lump these all together if I thought that they were all okay. You can do it either way, but just make sure that you're thorough and you reference every single question at some point. Now, when I'm looking at questions 6 through 10, I'm just asking the students to define the following terms. When I look at my goals, they are the ones that I want them to define, so that it's a perfect match. And so what I would do is, I would write that questions 6 through 10 refer to goal number 3, and they're all okay. I should actually also write next to questions 1 through 5 that they reflect goal number 1. Now that's implied by the okay, but it's probably better if you spell it out. And so I'll just fill this in here. Okay. Now if I'm looking at the next one, I have question 11, and it says in the space below, describe how the trip some of you took to the plantation last week changed your idea of what a modern plantation looks like. Now in that case, I'm looking at my goals, and it says students will be able to identify modern instances of the following terms: plantation, encomienda, mission, and conquistador. It kind of reflects goal 4, only a small part of it, right? And it doesn't really reflect it in the same way. They're really more describing the differences between something that is a plantation. It's just a modern plantation, so they're not having to identify a modern plantation out of like a list of options or come up with one on their own. So it doesn't really accurately reflect goal 4, and I'm not even sure if it does it at the right level, if they're just remembering the things that they saw about it. Depends on what the teacher did and all that stuff in terms of discussion as well. But from what we know that they went to a plantation and they could just recite facts about it and how they were different from the other one. Could argue that it might be a little level 2, but I could probably easily reduce that to a basic level 1. So finally, the last question is 12, and I have a map, right? And I want them to label the locations on a map. And when I look at my goals, this is goal number 2, so that's good. However, Mexico City was not in my goal. So when I write it down, I would say question 12 reflects goal number 2. Oops, I guess I have that there. It's just not, I didn't highlight it. Goal number 2, but Mexico City is not in the goals. And that's that. Now, so what I've done is I have checked every question to see if it matches up with a goal and whether it matches up correctly. The other thing I do is look at content validity issues from goals to questions. So now I have to ask myself, well, was each goal actually represented on my assessment? Or were there some goals that I kind of forgot about? So goal 1, 2, and 3 were okay. Based on our analysis so far, right? If I'm looking at these, this was represented, this was represented, this was represented. However, 4 wasn't really represented well, and then 5 is not really in there at all. So that's no good. Now that is the validity aspect of this critique. You also have to do a reliability critique and a critique of any potential bias issues. The reliability issues, I won't have this on the actual exam, but what you can do is look for the impact of guessing on any set of items, the openness or unreliability of responses. In other words, if it's an open-ended response and I'm not really framing the question very well, and I'm opening myself up to all sorts of different kinds of responses that I may or may not want, but I might have to accept as technically getting credit. I want to look for that, and then I also want to look at whether or not I have a reliable number of questions for every goal to really tell me whether or not that goal was accurately assessed. And when I look at these, I can say that guessing has an impact on my first set of questions because they are, you know, matching questions, and so I really have a 1 in 5. Also, if I know, 3 of them, then I have a 50-50 shot for the other 2, and so that's going to be going to impact reliability. Guessing has a big impact on stability, reliability. If I'm talking about the openness or unreliability of responses, question 11 is, I could get a lot of stuff for that, and I have to start asking myself whether or not things were accurate. I didn't tell them how many comparisons they need to make. I'm really not setting any kind of parameters for the kind of response I'm looking for, so I'm probably going to get a big mishmash of all kinds of stuff, so it doesn't really have clear expectations or scoring criteria. Question 11 also represents goal 4, right? But there is only a small sample of these terms, and really I'm trying to assess this whole goal with one question about one term, and I'm not even doing it very well. So that doesn't really give me a reliable estimate. Somebody might have been able to do the other 3, but because I only asked them about one, they get a 0 instead of the 75% of that goal that they should really get. When I'm looking at this map question too, I don't really need to worry about reliability issues in the sense of guessing because, well, it's pretty tough there's a lot of options to guess, so you got maybe a 1 out of 1,000 of getting it correct. I may have an issue with scoring, and I may want to add that into my reliability issues, in that I have to determine how close is close enough, and ask myself, well, should I put little labels in there, little blanks, and maybe put more in than they actually need, so it doesn't reduce it to guessing? So I might want to add that as well. Question 12 might have I should just say might have trouble scoring it consistently, particularly between different students. One student's pretty close, another student's just a little more off, and I might mark one off and the other one correct, and then the students are best friends and they compare papers and they come to me, mine's pretty much in the same place as his, why is mine wrong and his is right, and so on. So that might be a potential issue that you have to deal with. Finally, we have bias issues. And basically, you're looking at anything in here that's going to either offend or penalize somebody. 1 through 5 are fine, no real issues. 6 through 10 are also fine. And then finally, we get to 11. And this idea again that some students went on the trip, I don't know why, but to ask a test that is assessing whether or not this goal is met is really a biased way where the kids who went will have a much higher chance of answering this thing correct, and I don't know if the kids who didn't go could answer it at all. There's no option for it, so it's not a very good question in that sense. And that's it. This is the format that I would like you to do it in. Again, the goal critique critiques the goals versus the content. I want you to just give me a blanket statement about whether or not you think those goals are representative, whether or not there are multiple levels of cognition, and so on. Once you're done with the goal critique, you go to the assessment critique, and now we're not worried really about the content itself. Now I'm just asking myself, does the assessment reflect the goals, irregardless of whether or not something should or should not be in the content? And the example again was Cortez is in the goals. So even though he wasn't in the content, he should be on the assessment because he was in the goals. And then I go through question by question. I go through goal by goal. And then I talk about potential reliability and bias issues. All right, I'll throw another one of these up, and if you got any questions, let me know.